So hello guys. So till now we have discussed the structure of human heart and the anatomical aspects related to the human heart. Now we have to discuss a very serious kind of a topic, that is cardiac cycle. So there are many things which are involved in this, and let's know how the heart is going to function. How is the heart functioning? So the heart is keeping on contracting and relaxing. So as we know, the atria will contract together. Both the atria will contract together, and the two ventricles will contract together, right? So first the atria will contract, pushing the blood into the ventricle, and then the ventricles will contract, pushing the blood into the pulmonary artery as well as the aorta, right? So let us now start with the very basic definition of cardiac cycle. This is what is given in the textbook. So the cardiac cycle can be defined as the sequential events. So the events happening in the heart are in a sequence, isn't it? First the atria will contract, then the ventricles will contract. So in this particular sequence, so the sequential events of the heart, which are cyclically repeated. So this is the definition of cardiac cycle. So this is the definition of the very basic term, that is cardiac cycle. The sequential events of the heart which are cyclically repeated. Okay. Now we are actually trying to understand the first important phase of cardiac cycle. So we are actually trying to stop the heart and see each and every single individual phases, each and every single individual processes that is happening in the cardiac cycle. And the first process is the joint diastole. Right? So by the name itself you are understanding that it is a diastole. So we know what is diastole, isn't it? Diastole means relaxation. Relaxation of what? Relaxation of the chambers of heart. So joint diastole simply means it is the relaxation of the chambers of heart. So I can say the condition of chambers right now, that is condition of the chambers of the heart, both atria and ventricles. So atria as well as the ventricles are relaxed. They are relaxed, or they are in diastole. So this is called by the name of joint diastole. Both of them are together relaxed. So both atria and both ventricles are relaxed, just like what you see in this particular picture. Here you can see that both atria are relaxed, they are not contracted, okay? And these two ventricles are also in relaxed position. This is meant by the term joint diastole. Now when you have both atria as well as ventricles relaxed, there are certain valves which are open and there are certain valves which are closed. Okay, so the open valves are your bicuspid and tricuspid valves. Okay, so these are the two important valves. This valve as well as this valve, they will be open. Okay, they are opened. Okay, and also I can say what are the valves which are closed. So your semilunar valves are closed. Semilunar valves. These semilunar valves are closed. So you have this semilunar valve over here. This is a semilunar valve as well as this is a semilunar valve. These two valves, they are closed. They will not allow the blood flow. Okay, so this is the meaning of saying that these two valves are closed, these two valves are open, so and so. Okay, so now we will understand the blood flow that is taking place during this particular process. So I was telling you that the bicuspid as well as tricuspid valves are open. So if the bicuspid valve is open, if this valve and these two valves, if this bicuspid valve is open, the blood is flowing from left atrium to left ventricle, and from right atrium to right ventricle also the blood will flow, because the tricuspid valve is also open. So this valve is open, this valve is open, therefore because the ventricles are situated down, the blood will directly flow from atria to ventricle. So I can say that there is blood flow from atria to ventricles. Do I need to be specific? I don't have to be, because I just need to say this is atria to ventricle. Both atria and both ventricle, they will be receiving the blood. So both atria will be transferring its blood to the ventricles. This is what is happening during the time of joint diastole, right? So from here the blood goes to here, and from here the blood goes to the ventricles. Okay, and since these two valves are closed, the semilunar valves are closed, it will prevent the blood from going anywhere. It will simply accumulate inside the ventricle. Okay, so this is what I was trying to tell you. Now, how much blood from atria to will go to the ventricles? there is 70% of the blood, 70% of the blood in atria, 70% of the total blood in atria will now go into the ventricle. Okay, just because it is opened, the atria contains, let us say, 100 ml of blood, so 70 ml of the blood will go into the ventricle. This is what I was meaning by that. Okay, so 70% of the blood in atria will go into the ventricle. The 70% of the blood in the right atrium will go to the right ventricle, 70% of blood in the left atrium will go to the corresponding left ventricle. This is what is happening over this particular time. Okay, so the 70% value is very much important. They might ask you 70% or the majority maximum amount of blood goes to the ventricles during which phase. So you should not answer atrial contraction, you should say joint diastole. See, maximum amount of blood from atria to ventricle is going when the atria and ventricle are both relaxed, not when the atria is contracting. This is a very important feature that you are supposed to understand, a very interesting feature. This is very important. Okay, this particular value can be asked as a question in the examination. Also, I can understand that since atria are relaxed now, atria will also receive the blood, isn't it? This is an important point. So this is the vena cava. From here, the deoxygenated blood will come to the right atrium, and from here, the oxygenated blood comes to the left atrium. So, blood flow from vena cava, both superior and inferior vena cava, and on the other side, on the left side, we have the pulmonary vein. Pulmonary veins into the vena cava, right atrium and left atrium respectively. Okay, this is what is going to happen. This is what is happening during the time of joint diastole. Okay, I hope you are clear with this. So let us just quickly revise what is joint diastole. The point is that both atria and ventricle are in diastole, they are relaxed. So that is why you call it as joint diastole. During joint diastole, the bicuspid and tricuspid valves are open while the semilunar valves are closed. That means ventricles can receive the blood, ventricle cannot send the blood anywhere. Now the condition of chambers, obviously, the both atria and ventricles are relaxed. And also the blood flow has to be set, that is atria to ventricle, 70% of the blood in each atria will go to its own corresponding ventricle. This value is very important. And from the vena cava as well as pulmonary artery, the atria will receive the blood. So atria are receiving the blood. Out of this total blood atria is receiving, 70% will go to the ventricle. This is called by the name of joint diastole. Okay, this is an important point. Now towards the end of joint diastole, the SA node that is present over the upper right corner of right atrium. Here comes the SA node, here comes the AV node. SA node will start sending impulses to the AV node, and from here the impulse will also go into the left atrium. So the SA node will send its impulse to the AV node, and from the AV node it goes into the left atrium. So this kind of a transfer of impulse is taking place towards the end of joint diastole. So I can just write the ending of joint diastole. By the end of joint diastole, what happens is SA node sends its impulse, and this impulse will spread across the atria. Okay, not just right atrium, from the right atrium it goes into the left atrium as well. So the atria are now getting the depolarization, right? So this causes something called by the name of atrial depolarization. Okay, this is an important point. Now we'll go to the next phase. So once the atria gets depolarized, then the atria will start contracting. Okay, both the atria will together contract. Right atrium and left atrium will together contract, and this is the second phase of the cardiac cycle, which is called by the name of atrial contraction. Okay, so this is called by the name of atrial contraction, and this happens after atrial depolarization. That means atria will receive the impulse, then the atria will start contracting. Okay, now the valves that are open, this is the next point that we are supposed to. We will just define all the phases of cardiac cycle under these headings, so it will be more easy for you to remember things. So valves that are open are the tricuspid valve and the mitral valve, bicuspid valve. Okay, so I am saying that this valve and this valve are open. Okay, but the semilunar valves are closed. Just like the joint diastole, there is no other closing and opening of valves that is happening during this particular phase. What has happened during the joint diastole is just continued into atrial contraction. Okay, in joint diastole you saw that the tricuspid and mitral valve were open. Here also the same thing are open. In the joint diastole the semilunar valves were closed. Here also the same valves are closed. So let us understand what is happening here. See, this valve is closed. Even this valve is also closed. Now, when the atria is contracting, we saw that during the joint diastole, 70% of the blood that was there in each atria are now then getting released to the ventricle because of gravity. Now 30% is remaining. So this 30% that is actually present here, 30% that is present over here, this 30% will go into the ventricle. Fine. So this 30% will go into the ventricle. So I can say that in the blood flow region, I can write 30% of atrial blood goes into ventricles. Okay, so this is the rest 30%. So now I can say the entire atrial blood, the entire amount of blood that was present inside the atria has now reached the ventricles. Okay, what is the condition of chambers? It is very easy to conclude that both atria together, isn't it? Both of them together, both atriums together, or I can say plural is atria, both of them are contracted. So atria contract. Okay, so that is contraction, atrial contraction, systole. I can write it as systole. So the other name for this will be atrial systole. Okay, and the ventricles are relaxed, and this is what you call as the diastole. So atrial systole along with ventricular diastole is what is happening during the time of atrial systole or atrial contraction. This is what is happening as the this is what is actually happening to the chambers of the heart during this particular phase. So these are the valves that are open, these are the valves that are closed. Now what is happening here? When atria are contracting, ventricles need to be relaxed so that the ventricles can receive the blood. It can store the blood that is coming from the atria. Fine. Okay. Now what else is there to understand here? See, when atria are contracting, due to the back pressure, no blood will come into the atria from the vena cava as well as the pulmonary artery. It is contracting. The atria is contracting, so it will not receive any more blood. The atria is contracting, so the size of the chamber, size of atria will decrease. So no blood will be able to come from the superior and inferior vena cava. This will be blocked. This flow is also blocked. Even this flow is also blocked. Atria are contracting, so the atria will not be in a position to take up more blood from the vena cava and pulmonary vessels, pulmonary veins. Now, the ending is also described in the textbook as how does this particular phase ends? The impulse reaches ventricle. Okay, so what am I talking about? So there is an SA node here, AV node here. SA node has sent its impulse to the AV node and this was transmitted to the left ventricle. So atria started contracting. By this time, by the atrial contraction, the impulse was transmitted into the bundle of his that divided into right and left bundle. So the impulse is going in this way and that eventually became the Purkinje fibers. It extends all the way till here. Okay, so now the impulse has reached up to the ventricle. Now the impulses has reached up to the ventricle and this is going to mark the ending of the atrial systole. So this is how the atrial systole phase is coming to an end. So now we will go to the next phase, that is ventricular systole. So with the impulse reaching all the way till ventricle, the ventricles are getting depolarized, okay, and this ventricular depolarization will lead to the next phase of cardiac cycle, and that is nothing but ventricular contraction. You can also call it as ventricular systole because both the ventricles are contracting. So contraction is technically called as systole, relaxation is diastole. Now what will happen as a result of that? See, when the ventricle starts contracting. When the ventricle starts contracting, there is a upward force, isn't it? This is contracting from bottom, so there is a pressure that is transmitted upwards. Due to this particular transmitted pressure, what will happen? This valve and this valve will close. The leaflets were open. With this pressure that is coming upwards, these valves are now getting closed. So the valves that is now getting closed is, which are the valves here? The tricuspid and mitral. So these two valves are now getting closed. Now at the same time, due to the pressure from bottom, this pressure is transmitted here and this will open up the semilunar valves. Okay, ventricles are contracting, the pressure is transmitted all the way here and this will open up the semilunar valves. Okay, so that means when you open up the semilunar valve, the blood will now, these two valves are open, the blood will now go from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery in this way and the left ventricle to the aorta. So it goes all the way here and this comes down to supply the entire part of the body. So this is what is going to happen during the time of ventricular contraction. Now when the ventricle is contracting, atria undergoes diastole. It relaxes. So the atrial relaxation coincides with ventricular contraction. So the atria will now relax while ventricles will contract. So the ventricles are in systole or ventricles are contracting, atria relaxing. This is what is going to happen. As the atria relaxes, the back pressure, atrial pressure is decreasing. So the atria will start receiving the blood from the vena cava and the pulmonary veins. Okay, this is what is actually going to happen during the time of ventricular relaxation. So the idea is that when one kind of a chamber relaxes, the other chamber is contracting. When one chamber is contracting, the other chamber is normally relaxing. And once both of them are relaxed, there is a phase called by the name of joint diastole. When both of them are relaxed, then the atria starts contracting, then ventricle starts contracting, atria relaxes, then all of them are relaxed for a phase. This is what is going to happen. This is what is happening in a cardiac cycle. Now blood flow will happen from the ventricle, from the ventricles into the pulmonary artery and aorta. Okay, from each ventricle, the amount of blood, so let me write that, it is a very important point. The amount of blood given out of each ventricle in one cardiac cycle, or I can say in one heartbeat, is 70 ml. Okay, so 70 ml of blood from the right ventricle will go into the pulmonary artery. 70 ml of blood from the left ventricle will go into the aorta as per our textbook. So this is very clearly given in our textbook. Okay, and this amount of blood that is going from the ventricle in one heartbeat is what you call by the name of stroke volume. Okay, this is a very important point, right? So the amount of blood given by each ventricle in one cardiac cycle or in one heartbeat is called by the name of stroke volume. So when the blood has eventually gone from the ventricles into the arteries, I mean the pulmonary artery as well as the aorta, finally the blood of the ventricle has been ejected out as the stroke volume, and so the ventricular pressure will start decreasing. Why? Because blood has gone out. So what does the ventricle contain now? Ventricle doesn't contain anything other than some residual blood which has not gone into pulmonary artery and aorta, that will be there. So the pressure of the ventricle will start decreasing. So these valve of the pulmonary artery and aorta, semilunar valve, the valve of the pulmonary artery and semilunar valve at the end of ventricular systole, because the pressure is decreasing, because blood has already gone into the pulmonary artery and aorta, it will start coming back. The valve will now close. Okay, and this is the phase that is called by the name of ventricular relaxation. Okay, or I can call it as diastole. So this is called by the name of ventricular relaxation or diastole. So the ventricular pressure is low. So that means blood has already gone to the pulmonary artery and aorta. So the pressure has been decreased now. So the valve of the pulmonary artery and aorta will start closing. So this valve will be closing. And this valve also will be closing. So let us write down the name of the valves that are open and the valves that are closed. See, actually in this particular phase, strictly speaking, no valve is open. So the valve that are open will be nil in number. That means atrial valve, atrioventricular valve, that is the tricuspid and bicuspid, are already closed. Okay, and then the ventricle was starting to contract. And when the ventricle contracted, started to contract because of the ventricular pressure, the semilunar valves started opening, and so the blood went into the pulmonary artery and aorta. Now, since the ventricle is now relaxing, those two valves are now getting closed, and this is the ventricular phase of relaxation. Okay, it has not these two valves, that is atrioventricular valve, tricuspid valve, and mitral valve. They have not yet started opening. They are not yet open. Okay, so this is the point that we are supposed to remember here. Valves closed, all the four valves are closed. All the valves are closed now. Fine. So now chambers, atria relaxed, ventricle relaxing. So the ventricle is relaxing. Okay, atria is already relaxed. During the time of ventricle contraction, just in the previous phase, the atria has relaxed. Okay, already relaxed. It has finished its relaxation. It is just a patent chamber. It has started receiving blood from the superior and inferior vena cava as well as the pulmonary veins. But ventricle is now through the process of relaxing. It is relaxing while the atria is already relaxed. Right? Now, is there any flow of blood in this particular phase? Is the blood flowing from atria to ventricle? No. Is the blood flowing from ventricle to the pulmonary artery and aorta? Again, no. So there is nothing significant kind of a blood flow, although the atria is receiving the blood. That it has to pump to the ventricle, that is true. Atria is now receiving the blood. So the blood flow in that particular phase, I can write atria receives blood. Okay, this is the blood flow that is actually only blood flow that is occurring in this particular phase. And how does this end? How does this end? The ventricle completely relaxed. So when the ventricle is completely relaxed, it has started relaxing. This phase is called as ventricular relaxation. When it has completely relaxed, this phase will go for an ending. Fine, this is the end of this particular phase. So that means when this particular phase will end, it will eventually go into joint diastole. By then, the atria will have received sufficient amount of blood from the pulmonary artery and the aorta. The atria would have received sufficient amount of blood from the vena cava and the pulmonary vein. So the atrial pressure is very high, isn't it? And the ventricle has now relaxed. So all four chambers of the heart are relaxed. Atria already relaxed since the previous phase. Atria is already relaxed. And in this phase, ventricle has also relaxed. So all four chambers of the heart are relaxed at the end of ventricular relaxation. And now atria is full of blood. It has received its blood from the superior vena cava, inferior vena cava and pulmonary vein. And because of this pressure of the blood, now at the end of that, it will go into joint diastole. Now what will happen? These two valves will now open. The atrioventricular valves, that is pulmonary and aortic valve, will open, and 70% of the blood will start flowing into the ventricle, and this phase is the joint diastole. This is what is happening at the end of ventricular relaxation, and it goes into the next phase, that is joint diastole. Fine? Okay. If I just talk about the impulse transmission at this particular ventricular relaxation stage, you might have seen what I was writing here. SA node, AV node, it came all the way here, it became the bundle of His, and this divided into right and left bundle, and this eventually became the Purkinje fibers. Now, till now, the impulses were transmitted in this particular format, isn't it? So it was going in this particular way, and from here the branches were coming outward, supplying the entire ventricle. But at the ventricular relaxation, for ventricular relaxation to start, the impulse will flow in the reverse direction. So it was coming in this particular direction. Now it has to go in the reverse direction. That is called as repolarization. So here an important point is ventricular repolarization has occurred. And this is what has led to the ventricular relaxation phase. Fine. So this is ventricular repolarization which has occurred, which led to the ventricular relaxation. So what is depolarization? The impulse going from SA node to AV node to the bundle of His to the right and left bundle to the Purkinje fiber. This direction is the depolarization. Now the reverse direction which is followed is called as repolarization. So from here, this is the direction of the impulses at the end of everything, and this will lead to the ventricular relaxation, right? So these are the things which are important over here. Now let us go to the next concept. Okay guys, now comes the very important concept of the heart sounds. Okay, so there are two heart sounds which are important for us at this level. Okay, so two heart sounds are there. Altogether we have more heart sounds and many other abnormal sounds are there. Normal sounds are also there, but as per the syllabus that you are supposed to follow for the NEET exam, there are two heart sounds which are important for you. And the first sound is the lub sound. Okay, and this is technically called by the name of S1 sound. This is the correct name for that. Okay, and when does it occur? What is the cause of this? The cause of S1, the cause of lub sound is the closure of atrioventricular valves. That means when the tricuspid valve and the mitral valve closes, when they close, this is very important. It is not during the opening of a valve that you get a sound. Heart sounds are produced during the closure of these particular valves. Very important point. Okay, so this is during the closure of atrioventricular valve. So when does this particular phase occur? When do you have a valve which is closed? Okay, when will the atrioventricular valve close? This is at the beginning of. When does this occur? At the beginning of ventricular systole. Atria has sent all its blood to the ventricle. Now the ventricle has to contract, and this blood should not go back to the atria. It has received the blood from atria, it should not give back to atria. It has to send it to the pulmonary artery and aorta. For that particular matter, the way to atria, the valve to atria, that is atrioventricular valve, which is the pulmonary, the tricuspid and mitral valve has to close. So when the ventricle contracts, the blood is forced to go into the pulmonary artery and aorta. So this is the point. Okay, this is the first sound, and the second one is dub sound, and this is S2. You will call it as S2, and this is caused by closure of semilunar valves. Okay, when will this occur? When do the semilunar valves close? The semilunar valves will close at the beginning of the ventricular relaxation. Right, so this occurs at the time of ventricular relaxation. So the ventricle has pumped its blood, all the blood from the ventricle, most of the blood from the ventricle has been given out to the pulmonary artery and aorta. Now the ventricle will start relaxing. So as it relaxes, the valve will start closing. Okay, so the valve will close. This is the point that you are supposed to remember. Again, the sound is produced because of closure of the semilunar valve. Right, so these are the two important sounds over here. Now if I talk about S1, so first you hear an S1 in the stethoscope, isn't it? How will you hear this? Using a stethoscope. Okay, so you hear the S1 sound in a stethoscope, and then you hear an S2 sound in the stethoscope, right? So from S1 to S2, what is actually happening? First you hear an S1, then there is a gap, then you hear the S2. A very small gap is there, and then you hear the S2. So ventricle is contracting after S1. So S1 is at the beginning of ventricular systole. So ventricle is contracting. Ventricle is contracting after S1. So from this S1, if I talk about this very small time limit for till the S2 is occurring, the ventricle is contracting over here. So during this particular gap between S1 and S2, there is a ventricular systole that is taking place. Okay, so between S1 to S2, what is happening? there is ventricular systole which is taking place, and after S2 again, after some time you are going to hear S1 again. Okay, after some more time you are going to hear S1 again, and in this particular time your ventricle will start relaxing. So this is the time, see, ventricle is relaxing, isn't it? So it is at the starting of ventricular relaxation. So during this particular phase, the ventricle is keeping on relaxing. So here I can write ventricular relaxation, or I can write it as diastole. So between S1 to S2 ventricular systole is occurring. Between S2 to S1, that means after S2 till the next S1, the ventricular relaxation is happening, right? So these are the features of the heart sound. Okay, so these are the sounds which are produced by the heart, which are audible through the stethoscope. So these are the only questions that they are going to ask from heart sounds. Nothing more is required at your level, whether it is high pitched or low pitched. I don't think those are important. So if you require those informations, do let me know in the comment box below. So guys, we were discussing the concept of stroke volume, right? So this is the amount of blood that is pumped out of each ventricle in one cardiac cycle, in one ventricular contraction. So that is 70 ml. So that means 70 ml of blood will go from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery and the left ventricle into the aorta. Both of them, okay, that will be, each of them will be 17 ml. So this is an important point to remember. Now do you know the amount, the heart rate of the person, normal heart rate, the number of times there is heartbeat per minute, number of times the heart is beating per minute. This is actually having the value 60 to 100. So anything between 60 to 100 per minute is normal. Okay, 60 to 100 is normal. But the value in NCRT, what we are supposed to remember, is a standard value, and that is 72 beats per minute. So this is a standard value of a resting normal adult. Okay, so you will be remembering this value as the heart rate of a person. So whenever they are asking you a question, what is the normal heart rate of a person, remember it is 72 beats per minute. Or I can say, simply put it in another words, that when do you say that heart is beating? Whenever a cardiac cycle is occurring, the heart is beating, isn't it? So that means in a minute, almost 72 times the cardiac cycle is happening. So this is the frequency of cardiac cycle in a minute. Okay, so 72 beats per minute is the normal heart rate of a person, and which is also the number of cardiac cycles in 1 minute. Both are the same. So if I know the amount of blood pumped in one heartbeat, then I know that there are 72 heartbeats per minute. I can find out the amount of blood pumped in, okay, amount of blood pumped in 1 minute. Okay, each contraction it is 70 multiplied by, there are 72 times it is contracting per minute. So this is around this is nearly, you can say 4900 something, you will be having a value ml, and this is approximated to 5000 ml, or I can say 5 liters. This is a very important value. The amount of blood that is pumped in 1 minute by each of the ventricle is 5 liter. Okay, so this is the value that you are supposed to remember. Now you have a very important name for this. This is called by the name of cardiac output. Okay, remember this is a very important question. So they can ask you the question, what is cardiac output, in the school exams, in the entrance exams, wherever you are learning this topic, the concepts of human blood, isn't it, body fluids and circulation. This is a very important concept that they can directly ask you in all sorts of exams that you are going to face till your Neet UG. Before you complete the Neet UG, including the Neet UG, this is a very important question that they can ask you. So in 2019 exam, there was a question which required a bit of calculation, and that was very much related to this particular concept of cardiac cycle. Now cardiac output. So what is the formula for cardiac output? Cardiac output is equal to stroke volume multiplied by heart rate. What did I do here? I just multiplied this and this. This is the stroke volume and that is the heart rate. So this is a very important formula to find out the cardiac output of a person. Okay, so these are the features that you're supposed to know so far as cardiac output is concerned. So guys, now we'll discuss a very important topic, electrocardiogram. You have to learn very few things over here, but the questions that they ask from here, they target on each and every points that I'm going to tell you in this particular lecture. So please learn this in the best way possible. These points are all that you are sufficient, all that you need to crack the exam, but do make it a point to remember whatever I teach you in this particular lecture. That will be more than sufficient for you to understand. Basically, electrocardiogram is such a vast area which itself is a nightmare for all medical students, and you are trying to learn this at a very preliminary level. So the understanding that you need to have should be very basic, and that can be restricted to very few points, a very basic idea of what is actually happening over there. Okay, so you have a machine, and this machine you are connecting to the body of this person. If a patient is suspected to have some kind of a problem inside the heart, the doctor will order for an electrocardiogram. So first of all, let me try to define this by the NCERT definition itself. It is the graphical representation. Okay, it is a graphical representation. So you are getting a graph. You connect to the patient, you switch on the machine will actually understand what is actually happening in the heart. Okay, so in the heart you have an electrical activity, you also have a mechanical activity, isn't it? You have electrical activity, mechanical activity. Electrical activity means the impulse transmission from SA node to the bundle of his Purkinje fibers. That's the electrical activity. Mechanical activity is what comes after the electrical activity as a result of electrical activity. Contraction and relaxation of the heart. That is the mechanical activity. Okay, so you are actually trying to understand the graphical representation of, remember, electrical activity of the heart. Electrical activity, not mechanical activity. Electrical activity of the heart in cardiac cycle. We have learned the important steps of cardiac cycle, isn't it? So whatever is happening inside that particular cardiac cycle, the electrical activity that is taking place inside the heart, this is what is represented in the graph that comes out of the machine. You take it to a doctor and the doctor will analyze it and tell you what disease you are having. So this is the important definition that you are supposed to have, the graphical representation of electrical activity of heart. Okay, in a cardiac cycle, this is the definition of electrocardiogram. They can directly ask you this. Graphical representation as which of the following? They will give you 4 options. So you will have to select ECG, isn't it? So that's one question. Now this is how a typical ECG looks like. We are all aware of this. Now if you see this, there are many waves over here. It's a flat line. A lot of waves are there. There are names for each and every wave, right? The first wave here, this wave, it looks like a bumper, isn't it? This is called by the name of the P wave. This negative wave, a very small negative wave, see, whatever wave is coming upside above this particular baseline is the positive wave. This is the negative wave. This is a very small negative wave called as the Q wave. This is the biggest positive wave, largest positive wave, R wave, and then you have a negative wave again, and this is the S wave, and finally you have a T wave. Okay, T wave is bigger than the P wave. Just see, height is more than the P wave. Okay, now we are supposed to know what are the meanings of these particular waves. So P wave is signifying atrial depolarization. Remember that. That means the impulse that is generated from SA node has went into the atria, right and left atria. When the atria receives the impulse, this is taken up, and this is the wave that is actually representing the atrial depolarization. Okay, next one is the QRS. Okay, we will be considering this all together. This particular QRS system together we'll be considering. You needn't go into so much of detail in what is Q wave, what is R wave, what is S wave, how is Q wave formed. No need. You simply take it all together. Take these 3 things together and we will call them as the QRS complex. And this is caused by, if this is atrial contraction, atrial depolarization, what will happen? From the SA node, the impulse comes to the AV node, from there into the bundle of his right and left bundle Purkinje fibers, it reaches the ventricle. So the ventricular depolarization, this is ventricular depolarization. Okay, I hope you got an idea of what is actually happening here. Remember the conducting system of heart. Initially, it is the SA node that is there inside the atria which is starting to produce the impulse. As the SA node produces impulse, it will spread across the atria, so P wave is formed. And then it reaches the AV node and it goes into the bundle of his right and left bundle Purkinje fibers. So it reaches the ventricle and then comes this particular wave, and this wave is signifying ventricular depolarization. And finally, after the contraction of ventricle, there is, before relaxation of ventricle, there should be ventricular repolarization. That means the current flows in the negative direction, opposite direction. That is why you are having a T wave here. Okay, right. So QRS complex is for ventricular depolarization. And remember one more important point: the T wave is signifying ventricular repolarization. Okay, this is exactly the same thing that they are going to ask in the exam. It is repolarization here. This is depolarization. Depolarization means it is for contraction. Repolarization means it is for relaxation. It is for relaxation. Okay, so initially you have a contraction. Only then after contracting only it is relaxing, isn't it? So first the atria will contract. So for that matter there is atrial depolarization. Then the ventricle has to contract. So for that matter there is ventricular depolarization. During this particular time atria has to relax. Okay. And after that ventricle has to relax. So first ventricle has to contract, then it has to relax. Okay, so that is why QRS complex comes first and then comes the T wave. So T wave signifies ventricular repolarization and QRS complex signifies ventricular depolarization. Okay, once you are familiar with this, let us understand certain other points that are there important, which are very much important. Okay, so if you talk about the end of T wave, end of T wave is end of systole. So the end of T wave signifies the end of systole. It is a direct NCERT statement. See, what is actually happening here is that once you are having this T wave, you are saying that ventricle repolarization has to begin. So the ventricular repolarization is occurring. That means ventricles are about to relax. Ventricles are going to relax. That means when will it relax? After the systole. So if ventricles has to relax, it is the end of the systole, because systole means contraction, isn't it? Okay, so at the end of the contraction it has to relax. First contraction will occur, after the contraction ends, at the end of the contraction it has to relax. That is why you are saying that end of T wave is end of systole. And what is going to happen after that? Ventricles will relax. This is a direct NCERT statement. You just have to completely remember this. You should not have any doubt in this when you remember each and every word here. Okay, then if you count the QRS complex, okay, you take an ECG of a person, you will have a lot of QRS complexes. If you count this, you can find out the heart rate of the person. So if you count the QRS complexes, you will get the heart rate of a person. Okay, so how to count, how to find the heart rate by counting, no need to remember that. Okay, that is beyond your level. And the next important point that you're supposed to remember is the ST elevation. See, this is a very advanced kind of an understanding. Like, why is this ST is elevated? Now, what does it signify? But this is a question that I have seen in many practice tests. Right, so if you have the habit of writing practice tests at this level, which is required, so you are supposed to know what is meant by that. This is the ST segment. This one, S and T, that particular line between S and T is called as ST segment. If it is elevated, if it is above this particular line, if it comes somewhere over here, if it is very above, that means QRS complex, and then comes the ST segment, isn't it? So if it is above this particular normal level in an ECG of a person, it is because of, it is due to the heart attack. You will call it as myocardial infarction. Okay, so what is heart attack, what is myocardial infarction, what is cardiac arrest, all these things can be learned after some time in the next lecture. So this is the meaning of ST segment elevation. Remember this, it is a direct question. No need to think more about this and ponder over these kind of things and spend, just waste your time on this. No need for that, just remember that. Okay, so another important thing is in 2018 exam, there was a match the following question. So in the match the following, there were 4 options. Okay, they were actually asking you to match the wave with the idea that they simplify. I mean, idea that they convey. Okay, so first of all, they gave P in one option, then the second one was QRS, and the next one was T. So you could match them with atrial depolarization, ventricular depolarization, and ventricular repolarization. That was there. And the last one that they gave in that particular match the following series was this one. Just see this: decrease in size of T wave. Decrease in the size of T wave, so that T wave is slightly larger than P wave, isn't it? If the size of the T wave is decreasing, it signifies a very important understanding, and that is coronary ischemia. That means there is less oxygen supply to the coronary, I mean the heart muscles, isn't it? So this is also called as, this was the option that was there in the question paper. So I'm just simply taking that particular thing and writing here. Okay, this was from 2018 exam. Yeah, coronary ischemia, or you can even call it as myocardial ischemia. Right. See, here I am saying myocardial infarction. So there is an infarct, there is a block in the artery that will cause heart attack, and that is causing ST elevation. Now here it is because of the ischemia, that means loss of oxygen supply, that is leading to the decrease in size of the T wave. So all these things are related to each other. So that is why I am telling you that it is a very complex kind of a topic. You just have to simply remember this. Don't go into further details of this. That will further confuse you a lot. And with that, we come to the end of this particular video. So in the next lecture, we will discuss the remaining topics, okay, which is there in this particular chapter. So we are left to cover certain other understanding, certain other points of cardiac cycle, the timings of each and every phases of cardiac cycle. So all those things are important at this particular level. So we'll do that at the next video, and we'll do the other miscellaneous topics as well. Okay, so if you like this, please like, share and subscribe to my channel. Click the bell icon to receive notification whenever I upload a new video on YouTube. Thank you.